He worked 2 jobs to survive, one in a factory, the other flipping chicken under fluorescent lights. He wasn't chasing dreams anymore, just sleep and sanity. But one rainy night, when Mark Reynolds pulled over for a stranger shivering on the side of a dark road, he didn't realize he was opening the door to the most extraordinary chapter of his life. Because the woman he rescued, she wasn't just anyone, and the gratitude she carried would reshape everything he thought he'd lost forever. Mark Reynolds didn't believe in fate anymore. He believed in bills, blisters, and the kind of loneliness that settled in your bones after the one person who saw you passed away. In his late 40s, Mark had become invisible to the world around him, just another tired face in a tired town. Once, he had lived in Las Vegas, a city of neon dreams and impossible pace, where he and his wife Hannah carved out something close to a life. But cancer doesn't ask if you're ready. When it took Hannah, Mark's world deflated. The only thing left of their Vegas life was a shoebox full of old photos and a deep ache that wouldn't leave. With no one to anchor him and no reason to stay, he moved back to his small hometown, less for nostalgia, more for survival. Now, he worked day shifts at a factory and night shifts at a KFC, hoping to scrape enough together to keep the lights on. He had once dreamed of opening a men's boutique, Reynolds and Company, he'd called it in his head. A shop that would combine classic style with modern grit. But dreams like that felt like luxury now, filed away under someday and left to gather dust. It was during one of those endless nights, rain hammering the windshield of his beat-up pickup, that he first saw her. A lone figure standing by the side of a desolate road, drenched and holding out a thumb like a question mark against the storm. He almost drove past. Who wouldn't? It was past 10. The road was dangerous even in daylight, and his body ached for a bed. But something about the way she stood there, defiant, soaked, exhausted, made him pause. He pulled over, rolled the window down halfway. "You need a ride?" The woman, blonde, mid-30s, shivering in a soaked hoodie, nodded. "Yeah, please." He unlocked the door. She slid in without hesitation. He reached into the glove box, pulled out the wool towel he used when the heater gave out, and handed it to her. "Mark," he said. "Olivia," she replied, gripping the towel like it was gold. They drove in silence at first. Mark offered music instead of coffee. She nodded. He tuned the dial to an old station, and the moment the song started, "Fields of Gold" by Sting, his heart skipped. That was her favorite, he said without thinking. "Whose?" Olivia asked. "My wife," he replied. "Hannah. Played it for her the day she passed. Haven't heard it since." Olivia didn't speak. She just listened, really listened, as Mark told her about Hannah, about the college meet-cute, the quiet marriage, the cruel illness, the silence afterward. He didn't know why he talked so much. Maybe because Olivia didn't interrupt. Maybe because no one had asked in years. Maybe because he didn't want to just be the guy who delivered chicken anymore. When he asked about her, Olivia smiled softly. "You keep talking. I'll tell you about me next time." He laughed, shrugged, kept going. Told her about the clothing store he once wanted to open, how life had other plans, how kindness didn't pay the rent. But it was all he had left to give. When they arrived near her destination, she politely refused to say the exact address. "Security reasons," she said. "I'll walk from here." "You sure?" "I'm sure." She got out into the drizzle, thanked him with sincerity that felt heavier than her words. and disappeared into the wet night. Mark drove home with a strange lightness in his chest. He didn't know it yet. But that night had just rewritten the rest of his story. The next morning started with silence, that soft, sacred kind that comes with sleeping in. Mark didn't have to clock in at the factory until the afternoon, so for once he allowed himself the rare luxury of rest. The air was still. The rain from the night before had passed, and the world outside his window was just beginning to stretch. And then, chaos. The sudden thunder of blades shattered the quiet. His entire house trembled as a shadow passed over the roof. Still in pajamas, Mark stumbled to the window, heart racing. A helicopter, right above his driveway. He blinked twice, convinced it was a mistake. Maybe an emergency, search and rescue, wrong address. Then came the knock. Mark opened the door to find a sharply dressed man flanked by 4 others, all in black. Professional but not threatening, more like security detail than military. The lead man offered a measured smile. "Mr. Reynolds?" "Yeah," Mark replied cautiously. "I'm here on behalf of Miss Olivia Bennett." Mark's mind spun. "Olivia? The woman from last night?" I didn't know her last name," he stammered. The man pulled out a photo. It was her. Same hoodie, same quiet smile. "She's waiting for you," the man said. "If you're willing to come with us, she'd like to speak with you personally." Mark blinked. I'm in my pajamas." "Take your time," the man said with a nod. "We'll wait." Minutes later, Mark climbed into the helicopter in jeans and a flannel shirt that still smelled like laundry detergent. A headset was placed over his ears, muffling the roar of the blades. And there she was, Olivia, seated casually, legs crossed, smile unchanged. But everything else about the moment screamed unreal. "Hello again," she said, as if they were just meeting at a coffee shop. This is... wow. I've got 1,000 questions," Mark said, laughing nervously. "Let me answer the first one," Olivia said. "I'm not in trouble. Neither are you. My name is Olivia Bennett. I'm the only daughter of Charles Bennett." Mark blinked. "As in the Charles Bennett?" She nodded. He let out a breath. "Okay, that explains the chopper. I was testing something last night," she said. "I wanted to see if someone would treat me with decency without knowing who I was. No cameras, no assistants, just me in the rain. And you passed." Mark shook his head slowly. "I wasn't trying to pass anything. I was just doing what felt right." "Exactly." There was a pause. Then Olivia leaned forward. "People are kind when the world is watching, but very few are when no one's keeping score. You didn't ask who I was. You didn't expect anything. You listened. You shared. And I don't forget that kind of grace." One of her men handed her a brown envelope. She held it out. "This is for you," she said. Mark opened it, and his breath caught. He couldn't speak. I can't accept this," he stammered. "It's too much. I just gave you a ride." "And I'm giving you a dream," Olivia said. "You once told me you wanted to open a clothing store. Now you can." Silence again. Not from awkwardness, but because words simply fell short. Mark looked out the window. The town beneath him looked smaller now. But in his chest, everything felt bigger, possible. When the helicopter returned him home, Olivia promised they'd keep in touch. Mark didn't know what would happen next, but for the first time in years, he felt like maybe, just maybe, his life wasn't over. It was just beginning. Mark Reynolds didn't sleep that night, not because he was anxious, but because his mind was finally full of something other than grief and fatigue. possibility. The envelope Olivia gave him wasn't just a bundle of cash. It was the undoing of decades of resignation. It said, "You matter." He sat at the kitchen table until sunrise, fingers tracing the edges of that envelope, notebook in front of him. He didn't know where to begin, but he began anyway. The store's name, Reynolds Cloth and Thread. Tagline, "Worn with Soul." It was strange to dream again, to plan instead of just survive. He dug out old sketches of shirt designs he'd done on lunch breaks years ago. Faded, coffee-stained, but they still sparked something. The next few weeks moved fast. Olivia's team had connected him with a local business advisor. He toured rental spaces, chose one on a quiet street near downtown with just enough foot traffic to matter, but not enough to intimidate him. Tommy, the landlord, was an ex-military guy with a soft spot for underdogs. When he heard about Mark's story, he cut the deposit in half. "Pay it forward," he said, handing over the keys. Mark painted the walls himself, chose earth tones, exposed brick, soft Edison lighting. He wanted the store to feel like a conversation, warm, thoughtful, and honest. He ordered a basic starter inventory, classic button-downs, raw denim, quality leather belts. Nothing flashy, just well-made, well-loved staples. But it wasn't just the store that was changing. Mark was changing. He walked taller, smiled easier, had lunch with old co-workers who barely recognized him. Spent Saturdays with his niece again, teaching her how to thread a sewing machine. And Olivia kept her promise. She visited twice in that first month, always unannounced, always with coffee and curiosity. "I love what you've done here," she said the second time, running her fingers over a folded shirt. "You built more than a business. You built belonging." He laughed. "I'm just trying to keep the lights on." "No," she said, her voice soft. "You're keeping hope on." They didn't define their relationship. It wasn't romance. It wasn't obligation. It was kinship, the kind that forms when two people meet in a moment that strips everything away and reveals only the human underneath. He asked her once why she picked that road to test strangers. She said, "Because it was the loneliest road I could find, and I wanted to know who'd stop anyway." Mark did, and that changed everything. 3 months after that rainy night, Reynolds Cloth and Thread quietly became the talk of the town. Not because it was flashy, not because it sold anything you couldn't get online, but because the man behind the counter made people feel like they mattered. Mark greeted every customer by name. He remembered details, birthdays, favorite colors, a daughter's wedding. And in return, people didn't just shop. They stayed. They brought friends. They told stories in that little shop with the creaky floors and the jazz humming low in the background. Local veterans donated hand tools and shelves. High schoolers offered to help with marketing in exchange for design lessons. One customer, a retired seamstress named June, brought in her mother's antique singer machine. "She'd want it somewhere with heart," she said. Mark placed it in the front window, a symbol of endurance. Olivia continued to show up, sometimes in jeans and a hoodie, other times in tailored coats that gave away her pedigree. She never flaunted who she was, but people began to whisper. "Is that Olivia Bennett?" someone once asked. Mark would just shrug. "She's just Olivia here." And she was. They developed a rhythm. She'd drop by. He'd stop what he was doing. They'd share lunch or walk down to the nearby park. Sometimes they talked about business, sometimes about books, sometimes about nothing at all. One afternoon, she walked in with a framed certificate. "What's this?" Mark asked. "A business development grant," Olivia said. "Not from me, from the local chamber. I may have nudged them to come by." Mark read the plaque, hands shaking. It was official recognition. Proof that he hadn't just built a store, but a space that was changing the fabric of the community. "I don't know what I did to deserve this," he whispered. "You gave a stranger a ride," Olivia said. "And you didn't ask what she had to give back." That night, Mark hosted a small event, his first ever. He called it Threads and Thanks. Free coffee, live acoustic music, community photos on the wall. He ended the night standing near the register, watching people laugh, browse, exist. And for the first time since Hannah's passing, Mark felt something return to him, something he thought was gone forever. Joy, not the loud, fleeting kind, the quiet, anchored kind, the kind that says, "You're exactly where you're meant to be." Years are past, but the story of Reynolds cloth and thread never aged. It became the kind of place parents told their children about. "That's where I bought my first suit. That's where I met your mother. That's where I sat with a stranger and left with a friend." Mark Reynolds never became rich, not by the world's definition, but his days were full, his soul fed. He built a life around meaning, not money. And Olivia? She never stopped showing up. They built a friendship that no label could contain. Deep, constant, honest. Some in town speculated about their relationship. Others simply smiled and called it what it was: rare. On his 55th birthday, Olivia handed him a worn, leather-bound journal. Inside were photographs, moments she'd quietly captured over the years. Him laughing with a child in the shop. Him sitting on the porch at sunset. Him pinning a boutonniere on a nervous groom. At the end, she'd written, "Some people build stores, others build sanctuaries. You, Mark, built a second life, not just for yourself, but for everyone who walked through your door." He cried when he read it, quietly, gratefully. And when he passed years later, the whole town came out. They hung fabric swatches on the trees outside his shop, each one signed by someone he'd touched. Olivia gave the eulogy. "He once told me he wasn't meant for greatness," she said, voice steady. But what he never realized was that the greatest people are often the ones who hold space for others to be seen, known, and safe. After the funeral, she returned to the shop, locked the door, sat on the floor, and cried. But not just for what was lost, for what had been given, for what one rainy night gave birth to: a ride, a stranger, a kindness with no expectation, and a life reborn because of it. We live in a world that teaches us to measure worth in wealth, speed, and status. But the truth is, our real legacy is carved through moments of quiet grace, through how we treat people when no one's watching, through the doors we hold open, the strangers we choose to trust, and the stories we listen to when there's nothing in it for us. One ride, one towel, one conversation. That's all it took. So don't wait for your life to change. Be the moment that changes someone else's, and watch what happens next.